talk for a few minutes. The thing I always, more people coming, the thing I always loved about Rudi's meditation practice was not only was it spiritual and, connected you to higher forces in the universe and gave one the capacity to develop a chakra system and a real connection with God, higher energy. But I love the practicality of it, that he never disassociated it from living in daily life. It was never in language, kind of metaphysical language or spiritual language. It was basic, my God, he was a kid raised in the slums of Brooklyn, and it was basic everyday language, that was easy to understand, hard to attain, but easy to understand. And I really loved, and I still love the fact that this meditation we do is not divorced from, everyday reality, from the fact that we have karma, we live in the world, we act in the world, we interact with, other people. And, and the energy of a higher nature makes it possible for us to do this consciously. So that life is no matter how terrible it gets, and today it's pretty strange, what's going on in the world. But no matter how it gets, it's really, it's something we can deal with. It's something that doesn't make us crazy, to get us upset. We've built enough chi inside ourselves to maintain calm and to really make clear choices about how we want to act in the world. And Rudi always spoke about, taking on situations, growing in life. He even used to get very excited about economic growth in life, when you were successful, making money. I remember when I lived in Texas, the thing that really got him going when I once bought a semi truck with a 40-foot trailer, because I was in the antique business and we were going to bring that trailer up to Big Indian and load it up with antiques. And he saw that and he said, "Now that's growth." I'll never forget it. The guy, one of my students, when these trucks start, it's like a engine of a diesel plane or something, He said, "Well, that's," he loved things that expanded you, made you grow, whether they were physical things, spiritual things. But he never misinterpreted deep inner work and deep growth to whatever happens on the material plane. But to me, it was just a joy to see the way he responded to things. And it taught me a lot about my own life, because when I was younger, I was very reclusive. I was very introverted. I didn't like groups of people. I used to basically travel around the world hitchhiking by myself, for years. And I needed to get out of that. And hanging around with Rudi was hanging around with the perfect person, because he was the most charismatic, incredibly, full of life human being I'd ever met. And I really began to understand this, and it began to work on me. The need to stop being so reclusive, the need to stop finding places to hide out from life. I always thought when I was younger, in my early 20s, I was like a monk living in New York City, because I lived a very isolated life. I used to work and go to work and come home, and I would write poetry and listen to music, and it was a very isolated life. And it forced me to come out of myself, being around Rudi, studying with Rudi. It forced me to take on a whole different dimension of what, life is and what life could be. It forced me to learn how to work in the world, because most of my life up until that point, I always rejected making money, doing things like that. It was always, to me, something that had nothing to do with spirituality. And yet I was wrong, because money is just energy. You understand? Life is just energy, and it's all a manifestation of higher energy in the universe. And we can't cut ourselves off from this vast smorgasbord called life. and live in an introverted world that, keeps us from experiencing and opening to so many different dimensions of what God has to offer us as we live in the world. And this was a very difficult thing for me to learn when I was younger. And being in Texas, it taught me that because I took all these insane projects on my shoulders, like building that house down there and doing all that stuff, going to a bank and they offered me half the money that I asked for. And I said, okay, we'll do it. And then having to go deep enough in myself, to raise the money to take care of the whole thing. Anyway, it was really, an experience for me of how to get out of myself, how to get out of all the boundaries and borders that kept me trapped in Stuart, and opening to what life presents and what life brings, and then using all of this manifestation of life to go deep enough inside myself and to really find where the energy is to do it. And then allowing that energy to manifest in a practical way in the world. So I think this is a key to what Rudi taught. It's certainly a key to what I teach. And it's a way that I live my life. It's a little less expansive today. I'm a lot older, and I've been through it all and I have experienced it all. And I was able to go through it and live with it and surrender it, everything from when I was a kid living on the streets of Paris, I had no money. I had, I used to, I had a friend who was a Dutch artist. He used to do, like sketches on the sidewalks. And he asked, so I said to him one day, you think I could get down and just color in one of your sketches? That's how I used to earn a living, selling newspapers on the streets. I used to do extra work in movies and all kinds of stuff when I lived. But I started out basically living on the streets there. I had no money. And, to living that house I had in Denton, up in Woodstock. And what I'm saying is that there's so many dimensions to life. And if you do deep inner work, you open to expand and to embrace the totality of what life has to offer. And nothing intimidates one. We're not intimidated by poverty. We're not intimidated by wealth. We're not intimidated by anything because it's all our teacher. And it's teaching us what we have to do to go deep enough inside ourselves in order to grow and to work out our karma on the earth and to learn how to be a happy person, no matter what the situation is, because that's the key to working out one's karma. And I learned this from Rudi, I remember we were going to India and I flew up to New York from Texas. And I walked into his gallery, and I had no money. I had like, a few $100s to my name. And I walked into his gallery. I said, Stuart, I'm not sure we're going to be able to go. So I said, well, what's the problem, Rudi? He said, well, I don't have the money to pay for this trip. I mean, we were leaving in like a day or two. And there were 4 people going, and he said he would take on the expenses of the trip because he wanted us all to go with him to India. And I'll never forget that day watching him and being around him and watching him work inside himself. And by 5 o'clock in the evening, he literally manifests more than enough money, not only for us to make the trip, but for him to pay off a lot of his bills and expenses. And it was amazing to see him do that. And he didn't go outside himself. He wasn't running around the streets with some kind of sign that's saying, go to Rudi's Asian Art Gallery and buy, Tibetan Buddhist art. He went into himself. He went deep into himself. And he tapped an energy that really manifested this thing that made the trip to India possible for all of us. And it was a great lesson to me. So that when I was sitting with the banker in Texas, and I asked him for $150,000 to build that house. I don't know how many of you know that house in Texas, a pretty spectacular place. And he offered me $75,000. And I really got a little ticked, but I just said, go and I heard a voice inside me say, just do it, Stuart, you'll get the money. And I said, okay. And I think he thought, well, I'm going to own that property. How are they going to do this? I mean, you should have seen the plans for that place. They were like extraordinary, you know? And anyway, we built a house. We got the money. And 8 months later, we were living there. People moved in, there were apartments for people to live. We created a Japanese garden. It was unbelievable what was done there. But what I'm saying is, watching Rudi do that, being around him when he did that, it it created a lack of fear in me about doing big things, about taking big things on myself, because I knew the only place you can get the energy to do these things is inside yourself. You have to go deep enough to tap that higher force of energy in the universe that comes through and it flows through and it enables you to do these things. I mean, I can't tell you how many situations I lived through in my life, like that. When I was in the art business in New York, I get phone calls, well, there's a statue available at Sotheby's, they want $175,000 for it. And I go, okay, and then I found out what it was. I said, okay, let's do it. So we did it. We found the money, we did it. And we eventually sold it for an awful lot of money years later. So what I'm saying, it was time after time of understanding the profundity of this work and allowing somehow the material world, the world outside myself, to teach me what I had to do to grow. Where I had to go inside myself to get the energy to do things that I had to do with my life. And I think it's inside everyone who's in this class. It's inside everybody on the earth. A lot of people do it through ego. They have huge egos and huge intellects, and they create businesses, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about using the physical manifestation of life as a reminder of what you have to do to deal with it and where you have to go inside yourself to get the energy to be able to embrace it. And it eliminates fear. It eliminates insecurity. It really creates a capacity inside ourselves that we can do wonderful things. I mean, if you're an artist, you can go inside to where these wonderful paintings, like Bach, when he's dying, everybody's crying and moaning. What are you crying about? I'm going to where the music came from. It comes from. And that's where the art comes from. It's where the dance comes from. It's where all of life comes from. And we have a connection inside ourselves to consciously go there and draw upon that creative energy and use it every day in our lives. Now, where did I learn that? I learned that from the master, from Rudi. That's where I learned that. I didn't know this when I was a 24-year-old poet, drugged out of my mind and hitchhiking around Europe and eventually winding up in a Spanish prison. And, I didn't know this, living in Morocco and, smoking dope every day and hashish. And, when I met him and I saw what we can do with our lives and how everything we do with our lives is a reminder where to go to get the energy to do it, so that it's not done through ego and greed and some obsession with money and power, but it's done with gratitude, with love, with joy. And the only reason I did it, honestly, is I had to support ashrams. That was the only reason I ever made money in my life. I had, in Texas, there were 25 people living in a house and they had to eat. We had to, and I had to work on myself to be able to help support this thing, and it went on and on and on. Back in New York, it was the same thing. I had 100 people studying with me, maybe more in New York. A lot of people used to come every week. And I needed to go where the energy was in order to support the job I was doing for God on the earth. And it's amazing. So life itself became the reminder. And it wasn't an excuse to fail, it was an excuse to succeed. Where do you go to get the energy to succeed? You have to go inside yourself to succeed in a real way. You don't turn into a Donald Trump or one of these crazy billionaires that, I mean, I always tell that story about, I had this incredible Buddhist statue. It was really an unbelievable thing, and it was really very valuable statue. And, and I love this story, but I tell it, and probably most of you know it, but I'll tell it again. And I remember calling up this guy who was very wealthy, family this is back in the early 2000s, probably worth 15, $20 billion. And he was a major collector of the kind of art that I sold. So I called him up. I said, I got something that would be really good in your collection. He comes over to my loft. He comes out of the elevator. I'll never forget this. This was like the Buddha talking to me, bitching and complaining about everything in life. There's nothing right in the world. So finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I said to him, look, I won't tell you who it is. Look, I mean, you were just born into it. It was the right sperm, for God's sake. What are you bitching about? And he looked at me and he said to me, you want it? And I said, look, you're not going to give it to me. I'm not worried about it. But, what are you complaining about? You have what every person in this stinking country dreams about having and living, and you're bitching and complaining. I mean, it was like the Buddha telling me, what makes you really happy? It's nothing external, it's all internal. It's building a system inside that is strong enough to open the heart, to keep the heart open. And I think that is really the essence of what we do. Taking on all of these situations so that we can build a system inside that enables us to keep our hearts open and to love. Because as long as there's fear of life inside, the heart is not going to stay open. The heart will open when you have little successes and this and that, but it's not going to stay open permanently. So I think this is a really important thing to learn. To not be intimidated by the pressure of life. I mean, Rudi always talked about, he said, diamonds are a product of 50,000 years of the Earth's pressure. Pressure is not a negative thing, especially if you use it to go deep enough inside to be able to transform, the chakra right below the navel into a place that really manifests a great deal of chi, a great deal of inner power. And, it's a good way to look at yourself, because then so many possibilities open up in life. And it doesn't matter one's age, what race you are, what religion you are, whether you're gay, straight, XYZ, whatever those, letters are. I mean, it doesn't matter. None of that. It's all bullshit. It's all an excuse to not being happy. Because none of that works. The only real prison anybody lives in is the prison we create for ourselves. And the whole purpose of this work is to get out of that prison and to use the objective as well as the interior world as a way to get out of that prison that people have created for themselves. So please, everyone, try and work really deep inside, open, and try to tap the infinite possibilities that life offers us as human beings living in this world. And try to get to a place inside where you can get past that negative quantity, that thing that says, I can't, it's too much for me, I can't. I mean, I don't want to sound like Barack Obama, but we can, we really can. And here's a way to do it by tapping that energy inside oneself to make it possible to do these things. So please work very deeply inside, and we'll have a meditation class. And afterwards, if anyone has a question, I'll be happy to try and answer it. I've unmuted everyone, and if anyone has a question, I would be happy to try to answer. Sometimes it's good to ask questions. It kind of shakes loose the Shakti.
Stuart, I have a question. It's Paula.
Yes, Paula.
Could you talk a little bit about the manifestation exercises you mentioned that Rudi taught you? Could you talk about that a little?
I'm not quite sure what you're talking. What manner? I mean, I learned so many from him that could be
Yeah,
for.
you had mentioned that I'm paraphrasing now. It was, you said that if you needed to manifest something for your life, so say, you were talking about the money for building the facility, and you had mentioned.
Well, okay, I can talk about that. Really taught me these things, not because he wanted me to make money, or to be financially successful. He taught me these things because I was running ashrams. I was doing very deep spiritual work for him. I was a very devoted student that way. I took upon myself a lot of really difficult situations. And he taught me these ways of manifesting money and doing things like that, not because, he wanted me to get rich, but he knew that I needed to know how to do these things in order to run the situations I was running. And, I mean, he always told me that, you always have to be above it. If, whatever it is comes through you, you have to be above it. If it comes down on your head, you're going to drown. And that's why he taught me these things. I mean, one day I came to him, I'll never forget, I'm walking on the streets of Manhattan and I was jumped by a gang of about 12 kids, on a street corner there. And I was carrying a camera and they stole the camera from me. And I was living in his ashram at the time. I walked in there and he looked, what happened? I told him what happened, sat me down, and he did an exercise with me where he gave me two guardian figures that will be with me the rest of my life to protect me from things like that happening. I mean, he knew what my life was all about. He knew what I was going to do with my life, what my devotion was. And, it wasn't to being psychic, it wasn't to making money, it was to truly do God's work on the earth. That's why he he did all these things. He took my hands away, you know? These are not my hands. He took them away from me so I could do healing. And these aren't exercises you give out to just anybody. People have to be willing to truly do God's work on the earth. Then they learn these things. And that's why he did this. I mean, it's the only reason.
Thank
And
you,
here it
Stuart.
is, 40 years after he died. What is it? It's almost 40 years more, 50 years since he died. And today I'm still doing his work, the work that he taught me. I never changed it. You know, a lot of people, they have pictures of Rudi, but they don't actually do what Rudi taught. I've always tried to keep it very basic and simple and do what I learned. I said, why change something that works? Worked for me. It saved my life. And that's why he did all those things. He took my hands away. All kinds of stuff. I mean, I'll never forget once when he was doing healing work with a student of his. This woman had a very serious cancer. And he asked me to go work with her in the back room of his store, his gallery. So I went back and I put my fingers on her forehead. And the energy was so intense and so negative coming out of her that it flooded my entire system and I passed out at her feet. And he came back, he started smacking me, "You schmuck, what are you trying to do? You're trying to absorb all that negativity, it'll kill you, maybe run around the block 3 times." And I came back, he sat me down and said, it was like you getting a cholera injection, you will be a healer in your life. And he gave me the passageway to do healing, which I don't do too much of it anymore, but I used to do quite a bit of it years ago with people. But that was, the relationship I had with him. I mean, he knew it from the day I met him. I didn't know shit. I mean, I was a drugged out, crazy young man, and I know I needed a spiritual life, but I had no idea how to get it. The moment he looked at me, he knew what the future was with me. So he did all these things, I mean, it was amazing. It was an amazing relationship. It's a true guru-disciple relationship. But there are things that, you don't just give out. If people have that kind of karma, it all comes to them. It always comes to them. I mean it. It's not that I'm looking for disciples. I'm not. I really want people that want a spiritual life. That's all I'm asking. I'm not interested in quantities of people. I'm interested in, I mean, look, the Buddha had, what, a dozen disciples? Christ had a dozen disciples. I mean, these are the greatest teachers that ever lived. And, they were able to speak to 12 people in their lifetime.
I have a question, Stuart. You spoke about doing the work on the inside. And so I would just love to hear what you mean by that. I mean, obviously there's the doing, which is like the double breath, right? And then there's the being, which is getting out of the way and being with the energy. So what do you mean when you say doing the work on the inside? Because this is my second time with you.
Okay. All right. Look, we stand between, ourselves and a spiritual life. And when I talk about doing inner work, I talk about working deep enough to get past oneself. Whatever image you have of yourself, whoever you think you are, please try not to drink until the class is over. Whatever image you think you have of yourself, whoever you are, whatever your anxieties are, your fears are. I mean, this is a lot of work to get past oneself. It takes the mastery of the double breathing exercise. It takes an incredible need to do it, because without that need to do it, it'll never happen. And that need has to be a need to have a spiritual life. It takes the will to do it. All of that combined provides us with tools that we can use to do the single most difficult thing there is for a human being to do. And that's to simply get past themselves. Because on the other side of all of our stuff is a spiritual life. It's work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of patience. And it takes a need that goes so deep inside that it really demands that you do it. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about I'm not talking about, working 9 to 5, I'm talking about the inner work that it takes to truly get past oneself, because we are the only reason we're not enlightened. And and sometimes even the most gifted people are the hardest people to teach. You know that? They're so gifted, they go from this to that to the other to the other. They're always great at what they do, but they're always kind of crystallized. They never get beyond the gift. So what I'm talking about is a need in a human being that is so profound and so deep, because probably the single most difficult thing to do on the earth is to have a spiritual life. You're dealing with things that are completely intangible. And if you don't have that need inside, then it'll always be a reason not to do it. I got this, I got that, I got a pain in my knee, I got I have a little headache, there's always a reason not to do it. If the need is real, and all of these things become reasons to do it. I got to go past my headache. I got to get to where I can you open your heart, your headache goes away. I got to get past the pain in my knee. The fact that I lost money today, or something happened stupid today, And all of that is part of the need inside a human being to do it. And then you do the work. You have to get past yourself. which is mastering the double breathing exercise, developing a really strong chakra system in yourself, getting real foundation and grounding in yourself. I mean, I learned all of this from Rudi. I saw how hard he used to work on himself. It was staggering to me to see how hard he used to work on himself. You know, I remember once I walked in his store, I'll never forget it. He's sitting there stringing beads, you know? And here's my, this teacher of mine with this energy of a great Shiva, you know, sitting there. And I said, Rudi, what? And he said to me, Stuart, I'm incapable of doing anything else today. The energy has been so strong. I've been going so deep and working so that I don't have capacity to do it. So the best I can do today is string beads. Those beads became sacred. And Rudi, one of his favorite expressions, work brings more work. He always said that. And it truly does, you know, it really does. But it's the difference between working on one level and then opening to a vast work that the cosmos gives you to do on the planet Earth. And then you have to grow to do it. I hope that's clear. Is that clear?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Stuart, this is Eva. You once mentioned that Rudi's mom pushed him down the stairs. Can you talk about that a little bit? Was that an accident?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't there, you know, so I just know it happened. I don't know why it happened. She was probably upset. Something happened. And he spent like 6 months in the hospital. His skull was broken open, you know. And he talked to me about this a lot, you know, the incredible thing in that whole scenario is how much love he had for his mother. I mean, his mother was really tough. I mean, she used to be like a gang mom, you know. She worked as a dancer in a bar, nightclubs, and was, you know, boyfriends with gangsters, and, you know, and she was really tough as nails, his mother. And she, you know, she didn't make raising Rudi very easy for Rudi. But his love for her was, you know, unconditional. His mother, he used to say, you know, the people that you have to love in this life unconditionally are your parents and your children. And it's true. It doesn't matter what they do to us, they're still our parents. And I saw that in action in the relationship that he had with his mother. And his mother and I became very, very good friends. She was, you know, I mean, there was a lot of love between her and myself. You know, but she was not an easy person. And he was the first one to admit it. Said I couldn't pay a therapist $1,000 an hour to make me grow in myself from what my mother does when I meet her for 5 minutes. He used to tell me. But why she did that, I don't know. I never asked. It was none of my business. I just heard the story many times. But the wonderment is to unconditionally love somebody who, when you were 2 years old, they kicked you down a flight of steps. That to me was a lesson in itself. Can't complain about anything in this world, you know?
Oh, he was only 2?
Huh?
He was only 2?
He was 2 years old, yeah.
Oh.
It's a miracle that he lived, you know, lived. He had work for God to do in this world. He lived. Look, it's like me being in a plane crash with him, right? I had work to do in this world. Otherwise, how could you survive hitting a mountain at 125 miles an hour in an airplane? There was work I had to do. That's why I survived. That's why Rudi put his soul in me in that airplane crash, you know? So I could do this work that I do. Does anyone else have a question they would like to ask?
Yes, I do, Stuart. It's Alexis.
Yes, Alexi.
During class, do you interact with students on a, I don't know how to describe it, but like on a different plane or on a different place?
Well, during the class, I work with every person who's here, who's sitting in the class, although, you know, we're all in different places. That's what yes, the energy is transcendental. I work with people on different planes, on planes that they're ready to go to. You know, some people, it's just trying to clear up emotional stuff in them, mental stuff in them. Other people, we go to a different plane of consciousness because they're ready for that. Yes, everybody's different. And I like the class because of that. I'm not working with, you know, clones of Stuart. I mean, each person is different and unique and requires that when I work with them, it has to be a little different because everybody's different, you know? So yes, there are many planes going on in this class.
Thank you.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, well, thank you. God bless you all for doing this, for being here. You know, I mean, it's kind of a miracle, the Zoom thing. And as I say, today I probably work with 60 people in Zoom classes all over the world, for God's sake. And I think that in itself is a miracle, that people can come to these classes living in 15 different countries, that they attend these classes. So bless you all. Thank you. And there'll be a class tomorrow evening. And I hope to see you all in class.
Thank you,
Thank
Stuart.
you, Stuart.
Bless you.
Thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.